March 9, 1997, 12:45 a.m., Los Angeles, California. Wilshire Boulevard. A black Chevy Impala SS pulls up beside a green GMC Suburban, stopped at a red light. Inside the Suburban, in the front passenger seat, sits Christopher Wallace, Biggie Smalls, the notorious B.I.G. He's 24 years old. He's just finished his second album, Life After Death. He's at the Soul Train Music Awards after party. He's tired, ready to go home. The light is red, traffic is stopped. And in that moment, that single, frozen moment, a window rolls down in the Impala, a hand extends, holding a gun. 4 shots are fired, 3 miss, 1 doesn't. The bullet enters Biggie's chest, tears through his heart, and exits his back. The Impala speeds away into the Los Angeles night. And 6 months after Tupac Shakur died in Las Vegas from a drive-by shooting that was never solved, his former friend, the man he'd called from prison trying to make peace, the man who'd wanted the beef to end, is dead, the same way, same method, same mystery, same unsolved case. And the question that's haunted hip-hop for 27 years, was this retaliation, coincidence, or proof that both deaths were orchestrated by forces bigger than either man understood? When 2 legends die the same way, 6 months apart, and both cases remain unsolved, is it bad luck or is it a pattern? If you watched our video about the phone call between Tupac and Biggie when they tried to end the war before it consumed them, this is what happened when the world wouldn't let them stop. Subscribe. We're connecting the dots, showing you the pattern and asking the questions no one else will. Christopher Wallace, Biggie Smalls, the notorious B.I.G., arrived in Los Angeles on March 8, 1997 for the Soul Train Music Awards. He was there to present an award, to promote his upcoming album, to show the West Coast that despite everything, despite Tupac's death 6 months earlier, despite the East Coast-West Coast war, despite the threats and the tension, he wasn't hiding. He was there, visible, confident, and according to people who were with him that weekend, Biggie was in good spirits. He was talking about the future, about his album dropping in 2 weeks, about moving past the beef, about focusing on music instead of the war that had consumed hip-hop for the past 3 years. But Los Angeles in March 1997 was a dangerous place for Biggie. Tupac had been killed in September, and even though there was no evidence linking Biggie or Bad Boy Records to the shooting, the streets believed what they wanted to believe, and what they believed was that Biggie was responsible, that Bad Boy had orchestrated Tupac's death, that the East Coast had won the war. And in gang culture, in street justice, belief is all you need. Evidence doesn't matter, proof doesn't matter. If the streets decide you're guilty, and they decided. On the night of March 8, Biggie attended the Soul Train Awards at the Shrine Auditorium. He presented an award. He was professional, gracious, and then he went to the after party at the Peterson Automotive Museum. It was a Vibe magazine party. Industry people, celebrities, security everywhere. Biggie was there with Sean Puff Daddy Combs and other Bad Boy associates. They stayed for a few hours, and around 12:30 a.m. they decided to leave. The party was winding down. Biggie was tired. He wanted to get back to his hotel, so he got into the front passenger seat of a green GMC Suburban. Puff was in another car. The convoy, multiple SUVs carrying Bad Boy personnel, left the museum and headed east on Wilshire Boulevard. Traffic was heavy, post-party congestion, and at the intersection of Wilshire and Fairfax, they stopped at a red light, and that's when the black Impala pulled up. Here's what witnesses reported to police. The Impala came from behind. It maneuvered through traffic until it was directly beside the Suburban, passenger side, where Biggie was sitting. The windows of the Impala were tinted, but the driver's side window rolled down, and a hand appeared, holding a gun. Witnesses described it as a 9mm semi-automatic, the kind of weapon you use when you want to make sure the job gets done. 4 shots were fired, rapid, precise. 3 hit the door, 1 hit Biggie in the chest. The bullet tore through his heart and lung. Biggie gasped, slumped forward. His bodyguard, sitting in the back seat, immediately tried to apply pressure to the wound, but the damage was catastrophic. The Suburban driver, who would later testify that he saw the shooter's face, tried to speed to the nearest hospital, but Biggie was fading. By the time they reached Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, he was barely breathing. Doctors worked on him for over an hour, but at 1:15 a.m. on March 9, 1997, exactly 30 minutes after being shot, Christopher Wallace was pronounced dead. He was 24 years old, and hip-hop's nightmare had become reality. 6 months after Tupac, same method, same mystery, and this time, no one could pretend it was just coincidence. How many times can lightning strike the same culture before we admit someone's aiming the bolt? The parallels between Tupac's death and Biggie's death are impossible to ignore. September 7, 1996, Tupac is shot in Las Vegas, Nevada, in a drive-by shooting while sitting in the passenger seat of a car driven by Suge Knight. He survives for 6 days, dies on September 13. The case is never solved. March 9, 1997, Biggie is shot in Los Angeles, California, in a drive-by shooting while sitting in the passenger seat of a car. He survives for 30 minutes, dies at the hospital. The case is never solved. Both men were 24-25 years old. Both were at the peak of their careers. Both were shot in cities where their respective labels, Death Row and Bad Boy, had significant influence. Both were killed in retaliation-style attacks that suggested planning, not random violence. And both cases went cold within months, with police citing lack of cooperation from witnesses and the hip-hop community's refusal to work with law enforcement. But here's where the stories diverge. Tupac's shooting happened after a physical altercation at the MGM Grand. There was a clear triggering event, a motive you could trace. Orlando Anderson, the Southside Crips, retaliation. It made sense, even if it was never proven. Biggie's shooting had no such clarity. He hadn't been in a fight. He hadn't confronted anyone. He was leaving a party, sitting in traffic, and someone executed him. Which raises the question, if this was retaliation for Tupac's death, who ordered it? Who had the motive, the means, and the opportunity to kill Biggie Smalls in the middle of Los Angeles with dozens of witnesses around? And why has no one ever been charged? Enter Detective Russell Poole. In 1997, Poole was assigned to investigate Biggie's murder. He was an LAPD detective, experienced, respected, and what he uncovered in the months following the shooting wasn't just a murder case, it was a conspiracy. Poole's theory, backed by witness statements, financial records, and connections he traced through the LAPD itself, was this: Biggie was killed by a dirty cop, or multiple dirty cops, working on behalf of Death Row Records, specifically working for Suge Knight. Poole believed that Suge, still furious over Tupac's death and convinced that Bad Boy was responsible, had hired corrupt LAPD officers to carry out the hit. Officers who had side jobs working security for Death Row. Officers who had access to weapons, training, and the ability to disappear into the system. Officers who could kill someone in broad daylight and never face consequences because they controlled the investigation. It sounds like a conspiracy theory, but Russell Poole had evidence. He identified officers with ties to Death Row. He found financial transactions that couldn't be explained. He interviewed witnesses who described the shooter as a black man in a suit, not typical gang attire. And he traced the black Impala to a rental connected to people in Death Row's orbit. But when Poole presented his findings to his superiors, he was told to drop it. The investigation was reassigned. Poole was pulled off the case, and in 1999, frustrated and disillusioned, he resigned from the LAPD. He spent the rest of his life trying to get anyone to take his theory seriously. He wrote reports, gave interviews, worked with journalists, and in 2015, Russell Poole died of a heart attack. The case was never solved, and the corruption he'd uncovered was never fully investigated. Because if Poole was right, if Biggie was killed by cops working for Death Row, it meant the LAPD wasn't just failing to solve the case. They were actively covering it up. When the people who are supposed to investigate the crime are the ones who committed it, where does justice even begin? In the days after Biggie's death, the media frenzy was immediate. Headlines screamed, East Coast, West Coast war claims second victim, retaliation for Tupac, hip-hop's bloodiest year, and the narrative solidified. Biggie was killed because Tupac was killed. Bad Boy versus Death Row, East versus West. a cycle of violence that had finally consumed both sides. But that narrative, as convenient as it was, didn't hold up under scrutiny. Because if you're retaliating for Tupac's death, why wait 6 months? Why not strike immediately? Why not hit Puff Daddy, who was the real target of West Coast anger? Why Biggie, who by most accounts had nothing to do with Tupac's murder and had actively tried to de-escalate the beef? The timeline didn't make sense. The target didn't make sense, unless the goal wasn't retaliation, unless the goal was something else, like silencing someone who knew too much, or creating chaos that distracted from something bigger, or eliminating a rival in a way that could be blamed on the street war, keeping the real killers invisible. Russell Poole believed it was the latter. He believed Biggie's murder was orchestrated, planned, executed by professionals, and covered up by the same system that was supposed to solve it. And he wasn't alone. Other investigators, journalists, and people within the LAPD quietly agreed. But publicly, the department pushed the gang retaliation narrative because it was easier, cleaner. It didn't require them to investigate their own, and it fed into the story the media and the public already believed, that Tupac and Biggie died because of the beef, because of the culture, because hip-hop was violent and self-destructive, not because a record label executive with millions of dollars and corrupt cops on payroll wanted them dead. That story was too complicated, too uncomfortable, so it got buried. Biggie's mother, Voletta Wallace, knew something was wrong. From the moment the LAPD told her there were no leads, no suspects, no progress, she knew they were lying, or hiding something, or both. And in 2002, Voletta did what Afeni Shakur had done years earlier. She fought back. She filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the city of Los Angeles and the LAPD. The lawsuit alleged that corrupt officers were involved in Biggie's murder and that the department had covered it up. The suit sought $400 million in damages, and it dragged on for years. Depositions, testimony, evidence that kept surfacing and then mysteriously disappearing. Witnesses who changed their stories, officers who refused to cooperate, and in 2005 the case was dismissed. The judge ruled that there wasn't enough evidence to prove the LAPD's involvement. Voletta appealed. The case was eventually settled in 2010 for an undisclosed amount, but the settlement came with no admission of guilt, no accountability, no justice, just money. And Voletta Wallace, like Afeni Shakur before her, was left with a check and a gravestone, and the knowledge that the system had failed her son, had maybe even killed him, and would never admit it. When a mother buries her child and then has to sue the police to find out why, something is fundamentally broken. Here's what the Rampart Scandal revealed. In the late 1990s, the LAPD's Rampart division was exposed as one of the most corrupt police operations in US history. Officers were involved in drug dealing, evidence planting, witness intimidation, and even murder. They worked as muscle for gangs. They moonlighted as security for record labels. They used their badges to commit crimes, and then their authority to cover them up. And some of those officers had direct ties to death row records. They worked Suge Knight's parties. They provided security for death row artists. They were on the payroll. And when Russell Poole started connecting those dots, when he started suggesting that Rampart cops might have been involved in Biggie's murder, the department shut him down. Because if Poole was right, it meant the LAPD wasn't just incompetent, it was complicit. And that truth was too dangerous to let out. So the investigation stalled, witnesses were ignored, evidence was lost, and the case went cold. Not because it couldn't be solved, but because solving it would have meant admitting that the LAPD had allowed or even facilitated the murder of one of the most famous artists in the world, and that admission would have destroyed what little credibility the department had left. So they chose silence, and Biggie's killer walked free, just like Tupac's. Because in both cases, the people who were supposed to deliver justice decided it was easier to let the streets take the blame. The cover-up isn't about protecting the guilty, it's about protecting the system that created them. Voletta Wallace raised Christopher as a single mother in Brooklyn. She worked multiple jobs, made sure he stayed in school, kept him out of trouble, or tried to. When Christopher became Biggie Smalls, when he started making money from rap, Voletta was proud, but she was also scared. She'd seen what happened to young black men who got famous, who made money, who became targets, and she warned him, told him to be careful, to stay out of the street politics, to focus on the music, and Biggie tried, he really did. But by 1996, he was caught in a war he didn't start and couldn't stop. The media had decided he was Tupac's enemy. The streets had decided he was responsible for Tupac's death. And no amount of denying it, no amount of trying to stay neutral, mattered, because the narrative was bigger than the truth, and the narrative said Biggie had to die. Voletta got the call at 2 a.m. on March 9, 1997. Her son had been shot. He was at the hospital. She needed to come immediately. She took the first flight from New York to Los Angeles, and by the time she arrived, Christopher was already gone. The doctors told her he'd been shot in the chest, that he'd died quickly, that he probably didn't suffer, but Voletta knew that wasn't true, because Christopher had been suffering for months, from the weight of being blamed for Tupac's death, from the threats, from the fear that every time he left the house it might be the last time, and now it was. And Voletta was left with the same grief Afeni Shakur had carried 6 months earlier, the grief of burying a son who was taken too soon, by violence that could have been prevented, by a culture that valued beef over peace, and by a system that refused to hold anyone accountable. In interviews after Biggie's death, Voletta described feeling helpless. She'd raised a good man, a talented artist, someone who wanted to provide for his family and tell stories through music, and the world had turned him into a villain, a target, a casualty of a war he didn't want to fight. And when she tried to get justice, when she sued the LAPD, when she demanded answers, she was met with stonewalling, with bureaucracy, with a system designed to protect itself, not the victims. And after years of fighting, after spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on lawyers, after reliving her son's death over and over in depositions and court hearings, Voletta got a settlement, not justice, not accountability, just money, and an unsigned letter that basically said, "We're not admitting anything, but here's some cash to make you go away." And that was supposed to be closure. That was supposed to be enough. But how can it ever be enough when your son's killer is still free, when the people who could have stopped it chose not to, when the system that was supposed to protect him maybe even participated in killing him? Voletta Wallace is 71 years old now, and she still doesn't have answers. She still doesn't know who killed her son. She has theories, she has suspicions, but she doesn't have justice, and she probably never will, because the people who know, the cops, the witnesses, the ones who were there, have chosen silence. And in that silence, Biggie's legacy is frozen, not as the artist he was, but as the other half of the Tupac-Biggie tragedy, forever linked, forever defined by the beef, forever remembered for how he died instead of how he lived. When you lose your child to violence, you don't just lose them, you lose every future moment, every birthday, every grandchild, every chance to say "I love you" one more time. In the 27 years since Biggie's death, his murder has remained unsolved. The LAPD officially classifies it as a cold case, which is police speak for "we gave up." But the truth is messier, because it's not that they couldn't solve it, it's that solving it would have meant confronting truths the department didn't want to face. Russell Poole died in 2015, still believing he'd uncovered a conspiracy that no one in power wanted to acknowledge. Voletta Wallace settled her lawsuit in 2010, getting money but no answers, and the corrupt cops Poole identified, most of them retired with pensions, some were quietly reassigned. A few faced unrelated charges in the Rampart Scandal, but none were ever charged with Biggie's murder, because charging them would have required the LAPD to admit that their officers sworn to protect and serve had been working as hitmen for a record label, and that admission was too damaging, too expensive, too politically untenable, so the case stayed cold, and Biggie's killer stayed free. There's a parallel here that's impossible to ignore. Two mothers, Afeni Shakur and Voletta Wallace, both raised sons who became voices for their generation. Both watched those sons get consumed by a culture that valued conflict over creativity. Both lost their sons to drive-by shootings that were never solved. Both spent years fighting for justice in a system designed to deny it. And both died without getting answers. Afeni passed in 2016. Voletta is still alive, still fighting, still hoping that one day someone will confess, or that new evidence will surface, or that the LAPD will finally do what they should have done in 1997, investigate their own. But that hope gets dimmer every year, because the people who know are dying. or staying silent, and the case, like Tupac's, is fading into history, not as a solved crime, but as a symbol of injustice, of corruption, of a system that failed two of the most important artists of the 20th century, and then blamed them for their own deaths. The tragedy of Biggie and Tupac isn't just that they died young, it's that they died the same way, 6 months apart, same method, same mystery, and the fact that both cases remain unsolved isn't bad luck. It's a pattern that suggests someone, maybe multiple someones, wanted them dead and had the power to make it happen, and the protection to never face consequences, whether that someone was Suge Knight, as Russell Poole believed, or rival gang members, as the LAPD claimed, or something else entirely, a darker conspiracy involving labels, cops, and people we'll never know about. The result is the same. 2 legends are gone, 2 families are destroyed, and justice was never served. Some murders go unsolved because they're too hard to crack. Others go unsolved because too many people benefit from the silence. If you compare Tupac's case and Biggie's case side by side, the similarities are staggering. Both were shot in drive-bys. Both were in the passenger seat. Both died from chest wounds. Both cases had witnesses who saw the shooters but couldn't or wouldn't identify them. Both investigations were hampered by the hip-hop community's distrust of police. Both cases involved theories about corrupt cops and label executives. Both mothers filed lawsuits. Both lawsuits ended in settlements with no admissions of guilt. And both cases remain officially unsolved, with no arrests, no charges, and no justice. That's not coincidence. That's a pattern. And patterns don't happen by accident. They happen by design. Someone designed this. Someone wanted Tupac and Biggie dead, and someone made sure the truth would never come out. And for 27 years they've succeeded, because we're still here, still asking questions, still speculating, still demanding answers that no one in power is willing to give. And every year that passes, the trail gets colder, the witnesses die, the evidence disappears, and the people responsible get to live with their secrets, knowing that they got away with murder twice, and knowing that they'll probably never be held accountable, because the system that was supposed to catch them is the same system that protected them. Justice delayed is justice denied. And in the cases of Tupac Shakur and the notorious B.I.G., justice was never even attempted. So here's where we are. Tupac Shakur died on September 13, 1996, from a drive-by shooting in Las Vegas. No one has ever been charged. Biggie Smalls died on March 9, 1997, from a drive-by shooting in Los Angeles. No one has ever been charged. The cases are parallel. The methods are identical. The mysteries are unresolved. And the only thing we know for sure is that 2 of the greatest artists in hip-hop history were killed within 6 months of each other, and the people responsible, whoever they are, walked free. And the question that haunts every documentary, every podcast, every Reddit thread, every late-night debate, are the 2 murders connected? Was Biggie killed in retaliation for Tupac, or were they both victims of something bigger? A conspiracy involving record labels, corrupt cops, and people who profited from keeping the war alive. The truth is, we don't know, and we probably never will, because the people who could tell us are either dead, in hiding, or protected by a wall of silence that's held for 27 years. Russell Poole believed Suge Knight orchestrated Biggie's murder using corrupt LAPD officers. The LAPD claims it was gang retaliation. Voletta Wallace believes it was a cover-up, and the public is split between conspiracy theories and resignation. But here's what we do know. Both men tried to end the beef. Tupac called Biggie from prison in 1995. They talked about de-escalation, about moving past the Quad Studios shooting, about focusing on music instead of war. And for a moment, peace seemed possible, but the industry didn't want peace. Peace doesn't sell. Beef sells. Drama sells. And 2 dead legends sell even more. So the war continued. The media fanned the flames. The labels profited. And Tupac and Biggie paid the price. Not because they wanted to fight, but because the culture demanded it. And when they tried to stop, it was too late. The wheels were already in motion. The violence was already inevitable. And 6 months apart, they both died the same way, leaving behind 2 mothers, 2 unsolved cases, and a hip-hop culture that still hasn't learned the lesson. In the 27 years since Biggie's death, hip-hop has changed. The East Coast-West Coast war is over. Artists from both coasts collaborate. The beef culture still exists, but it's mostly online now. Twitter fingers instead of trigger fingers. But the lessons from 1996-1997 are still relevant, because what killed Tupac and Biggie wasn't just bullets. It was a culture that valued conflict over resolution, that turned personal disagreements into public wars, that let the media and the labels profit from violence while pretending to be shocked when people died. And that culture still exists. Different platforms, different artists, but the same mechanics, the same incentives, the same refusal to prioritize peace over profit. And until that changes, until we stop rewarding beef and start demanding accountability, we're just waiting for the next Tupac and Biggie, the next two legends who get caught in a war they didn't start, who try to make peace but get silenced, who die young and unsolved, and whose deaths become content. Documentaries, podcasts, YouTube videos like this one, because we can't stop talking about them, but we also can't stop repeating the patterns that killed them. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results, and hip-hop has been insane for 27 years. On March 9, 1997, at 1:15 a.m., Christopher Wallace died in a Los Angeles hospital. He was 24 years old. 6 months earlier, Tupac Shakur had died the same way. Same method, same outcome, same unsolved mystery. And in the 27 years since, nothing has changed. No one has been charged. No justice has been served. Just two graves, two mothers who fought and lost, two cases that will probably never close, and a culture that still profits from their deaths while pretending to mourn them. Tupac and Biggie didn't die because they were violent. They died because violence was profitable, because the industry built a war and then fed them to it, because the streets demanded retaliation and the system refused to intervene, and because when they tried to make peace, when they reached for each other across the divide, it was already too late. The damage was done, the narrative was set, and the machine kept moving, over their bodies, over their legacies, over the truth. Two friends who became enemies, two enemies who tried to be friends again, two legends who died before they got the chance, and two unsolved murders that prove justice is optional when the victims are young, black, and famous. That's the legacy, not the music, not the art, but the fact that we let them die, and then we let their killers walk free, and we call it a mystery, when really, it's just a failure of the culture, of the system, of all of us who watched it happen and did nothing. 6 months apart, same ending, same silence, and 27 years later, we're still asking why, when the answer has always been right in front of us. We chose this. We chose beef over peace, profit over people, and Tupac and Biggie paid the price, and we've been paying it ever since. Some stories don't have happy endings, they just have endings, and this is one of them. Do you think Biggie's murder was retaliation for Tupac, or something darker? Drop your theory below.